Here's Dinesh D'Souza to make some bad arguments and throw around terms that he clearly does not understand.
I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through.
Already I'm skeptical that Dinesh ever read the Bible with critical skepticism.
It has the complete ring of authenticity.
The Gospels have less of a ring of authenticity if you read the first chapter of each than the second chapter of each, etc., so you can compare the stories they tell as they tell them. When you do that, the contradictions become much more clear.
And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively.
How are they written with a polemical purpose at all? Does Dinesh not know what the word polemical means?
Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women was disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark or I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women.
I don't recall any of the Gospels describing them as hysterical.
Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as...
Well, I'm not... No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument...
Let me say a word.
Okay.
A lot of Alex's discussions with theists can be excessively charitable, but he seems to understand that Dinesh's arguments are low-hanging fruit.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. And the thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the events.
It would be even less credible if a bunch of men went to the tomb, because there is no reason for men to go to the tomb. If the Gospels were made up, the author absolutely would not have men go to the tomb first, because that would actually be even less credible than the testimony of women. It may even be taken as corroboration of the rumors described in Matthew that the disciples stole the body. The first Gospel to tell this story, Mark, sounds the most made up, because it says that the women didn't tell anyone about what they saw. If they didn't tell anyone what they saw, how did the author of Mark find out about it? For those who say that if this story were made up, then men would have been inserted into it to give it more credibility, well, that's precisely what the authors of the later Gospels do.
In other words, it's like, if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us.
Well, the Gospels are inconsistent about that. Mark says the women told nobody, but the other Gospels say they ran to tell the disciples.
Right. So I don't think that this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but
How is Alex doing special pleadings? Does Dinesh not know what that means either?
I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from Revelation.
But if they fudge the details of the story to do so, why should we trust them? Also, I find it to be a pretty big cop-out to say, effectively, that the Bible is full of a bunch of stuff that clearly isn't true, but the broadest, vaguest point that it's trying to make is still valid.
Fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason.
Wouldn't that be an entirely legitimate reason to contest it?
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy, and because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to...
Hold on, you're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering
and
the
I'm
tomb.
saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying.
You don't
I'm
think
saying that. I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know. But I'm happy to grant it. Yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
Well, that's in a court of law, right?
Even if it were the case that the testimony of women counted for less in a court, the Gospels are not a court, and the fact that women are the folks who have the most pressing reason to visit a tomb would make the idea of men discovering it to be empty even less credible than women finding it.
No, but what I'm saying is, if you're applying the is it impossible for us to know, I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You've stated that as a fact.
No.
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
Why not? Why is this not an entirely reasonable explanation for why the author of Mark depicts women discovering the empty tomb? Given that Matthew tells us that rumors were circulating that the disciples stole the body, wouldn't it look even more embarrassing if the story was that the very disciples who were suspected of stealing the body were the ones who found the tomb empty? You don't think it would raise suspicion if the gospel said, trust us, folks, the tomb was like that when we got there?
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well, you see, Alex, Dinesh doesn't really know what that term actually means.
What I'm saying is that you have an event.
Mm-hmm.
These events are described with great precision and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but they're nevertheless described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah, none of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
Dinesh is not answering the question about what Alex is specially pleading.
No, you're not hearing from the women. I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. I lost my train of thought for a second. Sorry.
I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like, if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you saying
important.
that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not.
I think the fact that some Gospels seem to add details that are missing from other Gospels that are clearly, sometimes explicitly, aimed at making them fit with prophecy more closely is actually evidence that Jesus did exist. This seems to me like something that would happen if there was an actual original story that was not designed to fit the Old Testament prophecies, which was then altered to achieve that end, rather than if Jesus were made up out of whole cloth to fit with prophecy from the beginning.
Let me ask you a different question.
I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
No, first of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus' crucifixion?
Yeah.
Unknown.
Allegedly
disputed.
the
There are a
Holy
couple of
Sepulchre.
potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
No, it would just mean that the Bible is not reliable with respect to that issue. It would mean that biblical inerrancy can't be true.
Okay, it would not.
No.
Right, it would actually be
hold
quite
on.
understandable that you'd have two guys,
and
they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial.
It wouldn't be trivial to any Christian who is doctrinally committed to biblical inerrancy.
Because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right,
The issue is
but
something.
that's a different kind, because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point, I wouldn't say that that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false. Of course
No,
not.
but I'm saying
but firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story
it
that the
doesn't
Bible
mean that.
tells is.
If the Bible contains contradictory statements, then by definition, not all of those statements can be correct.
True. It
Look.
means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm
not
simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up and that I could engage in exactly. Let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, oh, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3
Dinesh,
gets 33.
Dinesh.
Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Alex is referring to that passage in Matthew that says that Joseph, Mary, and Jesus went to Egypt after Jesus' birth. This contradicts Luke, which says that they went back to Nazareth when they had finished some rituals in Bethlehem after Jesus was born. Because Matthew says, "And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son,' this is evidence of a willingness to fudge the details to make the story of Jesus fit with prophecy."
Okay, and so you...
So in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual text, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 and its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 and its significance. That would be a contradiction. And in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
Actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, come on.
Now, strictly speaking, those would not be contradictory statements, they would technically be contrary statements. But that's not the objection Dinesh had in mind. Since they are contrary statements, it's still the case that they can't both be true. If one passage said that Jesus was 33 when he died and another said he was 34, one of those passages is false. If Dinesh disagrees with that because the gospel authors could be using metaphor to convey some theological idea, then the assertion that the Bible contains no false statements becomes non-falsifiable and therefore meaningless. To Dinesh, there's no falsehood, no matter how blatant, that can't be interpreted as some abstruse metaphor that is actually true in some non-literal sense. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.